Welcome back to the Cineposium podcast. I'm Martin Ibarra-Ramos.
And I'm Alex Apicella.
Thank you for joining us for our first episode of our third season of the podcast. We're thrilled to be back to present more virtual programming and film analysis on the show, and we have plans for some new weekly curators this season as well, so we're very excited to be back and to get started here. So with that out of the way, Alex, why don't you let them know how the show works and get us started with our first presentation?
Sure. Here's how Cineposium works. So, every week we invite members or collaborators of Cineposium to curate a film for remote viewing, and then we have a conversation about the film. New episodes are going to be published every Thursday, with various members from Cineposium coming on to discuss the films with our weekly curators. And this week's curator is me. Before we jump into the conversation about the film, I would like to issue two warnings to our listening audiences. So the first warning is that this conversation is likely not to be spoiler-free. While we will be talking about Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me largely separate from Twin Peaks, the series, if you have not watched the first two seasons of Twin Peaks and do not know who the murderer of Laura Palmer is, this discussion about this film will most likely spoil that for you. And Twin Peaks is, despite being an older show, a show that you very much can still watch without the experience of spoilers ruining that experience for you. It tends to be a little bit lesser discussed when it comes to online forums and communities, so you're less likely to see spoilers. So don't let this podcast spoil it for you if you do intend to watch. The second warning is that while we have covered in the past sexually explicit films, this one does have some problems of consent and incest and rape as part of the main themes of the film. So just be aware that that is something that is a major theme of the film before you go into it. And knowing also that while Twin Peaks, the show, was airing on primetime television at ABC in the 90s, this film is definitely not geared towards that same primetime television audience. This film is R-rated. This is an NC-17 film, closer to NC-17 than it is R at a lot of times, though I would say like it is a little bit of like a softer NC-17 compared to say David Lynch's other works like Blue Velvet, but it is something that is has been noted as being very shocking to fans of the television series going into the film. When the television series only says something happens, the film shows it. So, with those warnings in mind, let's get into this.
Far walk with me, this is David Lynch, fall off.
No, I'm sorry about that. I think I must have something stuck in my throat or something. Anyway, film Fire Walk with Me. This is David Lynch's 1992 follow-up to the second season of Twin Peaks. This is treated as a prequel. I'll put a little asterisk on that because we'll be talking about that as well. We'll say largely a prequel to the events that happened in season one of the series. And this film has a lot of things that we can talk about in it. I'm not going to be too invested heavily in discussing, say, like the lore or theories behind this, mostly because a lot of the theories and like debates that were surrounding the content of this film ended up actually being resolved in the third season, the revival season that took place in 2017. So any of the loose ends or stuff that doesn't quite end up like lining up actually is addressed later on. That being said, also, while this will contain spoilers for season 1 and 2 of Twin Peaks, I largely will try to refrain from spoiling season 3 just because like that is a much more recent piece, and I would say that the spoilers weigh a little bit heavier. So like I may just say, oh, this part is resolved later when it comes to that. So Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me was a very interesting film from a reception standpoint. So it was nominated for the Palme d'Or, which is one of the most prestigious film awards in the industry. And then it proceeds to absolutely bomb in the box office. But then the soundtrack ends up on the Billboard Top 200 despite the bomb, and then every single award the film wins subsequently ends up being for its best original score. and it was not very well received, to say the least, by critics when it originally first came out. When it comes to like that Palme d'Or nomination, it was actually it was rumored for a very long time that its nomination was greeted with boos from the audience, which has since been debunked. But that was like one of the large pieces of sensationalism that was kind of surrounding this film. But it has since been re-looked at by critics in a reappraisal, and now it is considered to be one of those works of David Lynch's filmography that is like crucial. Like it is one of his major works. Is the deciding factor. You can watch this film for free on HBO Max, and that is the Criterion version of the film. Something else is that like there is another version of this film that circulates around called the British version of the film, and this was simply like the British theatrical release. That version has no subtitles for any of the sequences in which audio is altered. So you may find a couple different versions of this film depending on where you are looking for. And with those comments, yeah, let's let's try to get into Firewalk with me.
Yeah, so that was all really great context. I mean, I'm already getting super excited about some of the things you mentioned because I have seen the first two seasons of Twin Peaks, the series. I actually watched it fairly recently. I want to say 2016 or 27, maybe 2017, like late 2017, I think is when I started to get into it. And so my memory of it is pretty strong. I haven't seen the return season. I think I watched the first episode or two, and then for some reason got distracted. So that's super exciting that you mentioned there's some interesting connective tissue there with that season. So I'm excited to get back into that. I'll say it's interesting that the mention of reception in terms of how critics have received it immediately and some of the reactions to nominations, because it's and this is something with Twin Peaks that I think is often commented on in general, is that a lot of it doesn't really make sense, right? And so I think that that's a problem for a lot of viewers because when something is confusing and a lot about feeling and a lot about symbolism and putting things together and just seeing how it develops, it can be a difficult watch, and I can totally understand that. But I personally still really enjoy the show, and I really enjoyed the film. Something that you made me think of was I actually recently picked up and started reading a sort of like memoir biography kind of thing of Bob Iger's. I believe he's still the current head of Disney, and so he does talk about because I believe Twin Peaks was aired on ABC, I want to say, at the time when it came out. And so he mentions in that book like conversations with David Lynch and frustrations in how the show was progressing and how audiences were reacting to it. And I think a lot of that was concerning the narrative progression and how it was confusing, and we want to know what happened to Laura Palmer, and I think they had a lot of issues. And so it's interesting to me how this film was received, because actually going into this and watching this, I thought this is really exciting. Like this is something that is sort of looming out there when you watch the series. And so the opportunity for me to now watch actually Laura Palmer on screen throughout the film and see kind of how things play out leading up to the events of the series, it was a really exciting I guess thing to kind of watch unfold. And kind of it feels like a longer episode of the series in a way to me, and perhaps I would call it like my favorite episode because I think this was just really, really interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think that this is also probably like one of my favorite episodes of Twin Peaks. I just think that like it works just really well. And then like kind of going back to what you were saying with the ratings and the reception of like the television series as well. Something that I think tends to get overlooked when it comes to conversations about Twin Peaks is so it aired on ABC, and it aired at a prime time slot. The show that aired before it was America's Funniest Home Videos,
Mm-hmm.
and its competing time slot was with Cheers and Seinfeld.
Right. Yeah.
So it's very interesting because like I think that when we think of like primetime television now, especially primetime detective shows, you have Criminal Minds, NCIS, CSI. These are all ones that ABC hosts now that are, you know, a lot higher in terms of like violent content. But this is the 90s. This is before Criminal Minds. Like Criminal
Mm-hmm.
Minds was like the one that was kind of credited for like breaking out like what can and cannot be shown in like a primetime slot. But actually, I think it was probably Twin Peaks that was doing that. Um, and so like it's almost like Twin Peaks was ahead of its time in so many different ways, and the way that the reception of this film gets treated also kind of reflects that as well, because it's like, oh, it took people like almost 20 years to really like sit down with Firewalk with me and be like, this does make sense, and it does make sense as like a part of Lynch's filmography, and it makes sense as a part of Twin Peaks that like we shouldn't be ignoring, like say some of the X-Files films. It's very different.
Yeah, and you mentioned that it does fit within David Lynch's filmography, and I think certainly it fits his style of filmmaking. I think, and that was what really worked for me in particular. I think a lot of the camera work and sound work, I think, were just a delight to watch and listen to, which were some of my favorite things about the series. Obviously the setting is just, this feels like the kind of place I want to live in, honestly. But the there's, and we can we'll probably, I figure we're going to get into some of these details in the film, but some of the use of sound, the use of various camera perspectives and movements, and playing with time. It's just really, really a delight to watch, and I think gets to what I personally get out of the series so much. And just, I mean, I often pay attention to those kinds of things in film in general. But this certainly felt a lot like the show, and I think for that reason felt like another episode and felt like really naturally fitting in with what was already there. But I have to say, because I forgot to mention, you mentioned nominations for the music, which I didn't know about, and I thought one thing watching the film here was the music was just awesome. I loved it so much.
Yeah, and I think that well, we'll get into talking to like one particular sequence that uses
Mm.
music and sound design very extensively. Um, but yeah, no, it to me like this film just feels like natural, despite being such like an innaturality in like every sense of like the term.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's fantastic, honestly.
Yes, yes. And I did watch it, actually. I watched it on Criterion Channel, so it is also available on Criterion Channel, because I recently learned a Criterion release, which is awesome, and I plan to buy it because I'm actually really curious what some of the special features are in that, because I just love to dig into some of that behind the scenes stuff. So that's exciting for me to kind of perhaps learn a little bit more from Lynch's mind himself, and what's going on here. So yeah.
Yeah, and the Criterion version is absolutely packed with special features.
Mm.
So this film doesn't. So with it being a David Lynch film, it falls into like the same. I don't want to say like issue, but it falls into the same problem of David Lynch over films. So when he filmed Fire Walk with Me, he filmed 5 hours of content,
Holy cow.
including a bunch of characters from the original television series that their scenes got completely cut from the 2 hour 15 runtime. Some of those scenes make it into the Criterion version, but so far there hasn't been, to my knowledge, a full 5 hour release cut. Though Criterion has in the past like expressed interest in putting together like the full 5 cut.
Whoa, that would be interesting. That seems like a fun. I mean, that seems like a long watch, but that honestly to me seems fun. I think for most Twin Peaks fans, that seems kind of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I think some of the scenes too, I think, oh, I just really wish that they were like in there. 'Cause there's
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of stuff with Ben Horn's character
Okay.
interacting with Laura that they talk about in the show, and I just really like I need like that extra step of that. But it's
It's
filmed.
interesting. Sorry,
it's,
go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, it's like it's just filmed, but like we just don't have access to that footage.
That's really interesting, but that also reminds me, I wanted to say that, so Cheryl Lee, who plays Laura Palmer, I think her performance in this is just absolutely stellar, and um, does in a way feel to me like something that was missing from the series. Again, I do love the series, but watching this now, it just feels like, wow, like this that I think that's partly why I say this is possibly my favorite, episode or whatever you call of Twin Peaks, because of largely because of her. I think because of what she brings to the character, and the sort of life and the facial expressions, the body language. Just it's. I think that her and David Lynch worked really well together in this film. So that's just something I wanted to add here.
Yeah, absolutely. Like her acting, wow. Like regardless of
Yeah.
like what critics seem to have thought about the film on its initial release, like the one thing that like everyone was kind of like very firm on was that like Cheryl Lee was phenomenal in the role.
Yes.
Whatever that role might be, they seemed very confused about that. But yeah, no, I mean she really is just like absolutely is like outstanding, and yeah, like her
Yeah.
facial expressions. I'm glad that you mentioned that because like that to me is like what stands out in my head so much is like some of her like wide-eyed like facial expressions and some of the screams that she does. And
Yeah, and those like shifts in like personality and um those moments of what are essentially dream sequences and those transitions that happen um to and from. And I mean it just was so believable that this change is happening, and that's really fascinating to think about. And but to see her performance and how the film is crafted around that, just brilliant stuff, truly brilliant. So if you want, do you want to try and maybe break down some of your like scenes that you would highlight in the film, perhaps?
yeah, let's start like right at the beginning of the film,
Okay.
because these first 30 minutes are the ones that yeah,
I
yeah.
have to admit, I laughed quite a bit at various lines. I think I jotted down a few, so if we get to them, I'll bring them up.
Yeah, it's I love the sense of humor in this, and I think that that's something that's like really overlooked is that Twin Peaks is very funny, very
It's so
funny.
funny.
I was legit cackling at like various moments here. It's so good.
Yeah, and like I think that that's like um yeah, I feel like it's needed considering
Yes.
like the rest of the content of the film, that like we have like this intro 30-minute interlude of just FBI agents not quite knowing what's going on or what's happening or what they're doing or anything
Mhm.
like that. um,
Yeah, totally.
yeah, and I think that so I was really into going through a lot of like the initial reviews of the film.
Mm.
And something that I saw very consistently was that the first 30 minutes of the film are disconnected completely from the content of the rest of the film. Uh,
Oh.
no, yeah,
No way.
no, I saw that very and I was like, then I don't like to be the person that's like, then you just watched the movie wrong, you didn't get it. Like, let me explain.
Right,
But
right.
but like honestly, it's not that it's not as disconnected as like what the initial critical reviews came about saying that it was. Um, it seems like it is from a surface level, but as you start to watch the rest of the film, they tie it back into um, the investigation of Teresa Banks's murder.
Hmm.
So Chester Desmond and Philip Jeffries are characters that are going to be worked with a lot more in season 3. So I'm not going to get too much into
Ooh.
them. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but I will say like a lot of that first 30 minutes is a setup for stuff that's going to be happening in
Oh,
season.
beautiful. Okay.
Yeah. So like they're not just going to drop it there and leave it. Like
Mm.
I think that is one thing that like David Lynch has gotten very good with is not leaving pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it seems like he's leaving a lot of pieces, he's really not.
Yeah.
Yeah, the payoff is going to be there. That's exciting.
Yeah, and so like the murder of Teresa Banks, like I think that by the time you get to the point in the film where they're actually talking about Teresa Banks again, you completely forget like that this entire 30-minute scene had even happened.
Hmm.
Because Teresa Banks was there with Ronette Pulaski and Laura Palmer when Leland goes to solicit prostitution from Teresa Banks.
Right.
And so, like, we see Leland murder Teresa Banks in the film. And
Hmm.
so that's why I'm not getting the
The
how did we
confusion.
yeah, it's like how did we miss this? Maybe it's just like the time. That's something that like David Lynch plays a lot with in this film that I
Yeah.
think isn't super apparent until season 3. Is that time in this film is a little bit strange. Um,
Yeah, maybe not super obvious that we're perhaps not totally linear here, or chronological, but I think later on in the film that does become apparent. And I will say, just personally, like, not having seen this film before, I appreciated the chance to be dropped into the world and understanding. I mean, I have seen the show before, so understanding that, like, there's already things going on here before we get to Laura Palmer, which I thought was a really great choice for me. I really appreciated that choice to see, like, okay, this is before Laura Palmer, and then it sort of it's already kind of in her world and in her life, but not quite to where it's going to be. And I appreciated the allowing us to start from that position and moving on to the trajectory that we know is going to eventually happen.
Yeah, and it ends up creating like this really nice parallel as well because
Mm-hmm.
this is a little detail that people overlook in the pilot. The pilot starts with Teresa Banks. Dale
Mm-hmm.
Cooper, in his opening narration where he's in the car and he's speaking to Diane, and his tape recorder mentions that he's going here seeking essentially a follow-up for the Teresa Banks murder because he's seeing similarities in the two murders, and that's why he's
Oh.
investigating Laura Palmer. So it's not even like we invented Teresa Banks for the sake of the film. It's Teresa Banks was always a present character in the background of the Twin Peaks lore.
Okay, I need to go back and watch that episode because I think I forgot that little detail, but that's
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I mean, in the second season as well, when you're getting into those episodes where like Leland Palmer starts to confess to like the murders, he does confess very explicitly to the murder of Teresa Banks as well.
okay.
Yeah, so it's like she's there, and they like talk about that murder as well. And in like 3 or 4 episodes, she's mentioned, but it's one of those things that's like this is just a little like this is a name drop,
Yeah.
and we don't have any context of that until 10 years later when Firewalk with Me comes out.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think that's just I love that choice again. This is even more fascinating to me in that case, to pick a little detail like that and incorporate it into this prequel film as something that I agree and argue it does make sense that we get a little more background on what happened there specifically and how it connects to everything. I think that's excellent storytelling.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And it like continues with that also into like the third season. Because like I mentioned that Chester Desmond and Philip Jeffries are gonna be working within the third season.
Okay.
That blue rose
Yeah.
that they talk about, that's also going to be something that they address as well.
Right. I mean, I don't want to say I forgot about the blue rose, but I mean, yeah, I guess it didn't totally, we didn't get it too much more often. I think there's a mention later on in the film, but other than that, it's not really answered yet. But it does make sense to me that I guess that now the fact that we do have the third season, I guess, but that not everything is totally answered. I think, I don't know, and I'm personally just someone who doesn't need every detail to be answered
Same.
in a film, so that's just a different argument that is just something that I'll just feel myself. But so what else about the intro here do you want to get into?
That's pretty much it. I think
Okay.
that those are the big things.
I also wanted to say Harry Dean Stanton in this is like, he fits so perfectly into this world, and like I love the like don't knock on the door before 9 a.m. Like that's a mood if I've ever had one. So,
Exactly.
yeah. Yes, love it.
Yeah, so I'm gonna skip like way forward, like like right into the pink room of the Roadhouse, because
Okay.
that to me, like I think when I think of this film, I think of the very intro, I think of the pink room, and then I think of like the very end.
Okay.
Those are
Yeah.
those are some of the most striking portions of this film, and the pink room in particular. Oh, that audio.
Oh my goodness, yeah, that I was just, I mean, I want to say, so like I'll let you get to this, but like something that I noticed, or I picked up on pretty quickly, was the sound mix. And I noticed, I wasn't sure if it was just me or my volume or what, but even early on in the film, I think when we first see Gordon Cole in the film, and I forget who talks to him in the scene when we first see him, but the conversation that happens, there's something in the sound mix, and it makes it sort of feel connected to his hearing Audio is already sort of dropped, and it feels very perspective based to me. That could just be me again, but I think from a standpoint of sound and how sound is incorporated into a narrative, or how it could be incorporated into narrative. And so whenever there's a sign of that or a feeling of that for me, I'm just in love, because I think it should be happening so much more often, because I think there's so much rich material in filmmaking that could be done in that way. So I was really intrigued by what I thought was happening, and then when we get to here, I'm like, okay, David Lynch is paying attention to sound mix very purposefully, and perhaps it's here specifically where he's doing it, but to me, it kind of feels like it's happening throughout. But yeah, I mean, that was what stood out for me here, was the sound mix, and just this, with everything going on with in terms of the drugs that are being taken, the altered state of mind and perspective here, and how sound, the music, and then how voices are heard. I don't know. I was just in awe of it. But I'll let you get back to it.
Yeah, I mean, like, you pretty much like said exactly like what I was gonna say, because
Okay.
yeah, it's like he does seem like he is very, very deliberately invested in the sound mixing.
Yeah.
And like the pink room scene is separated out into like essentially two like 4.5 minute like score pieces. And the first one, it starts when Laura and Donna enter the pink enter the pink room, and then it changes when Ronette Pulaski is introduced, and it finally cuts off when Laura has like that confrontation with Donna, and that's actually two separate pieces of score that is almost like you can't quite determine that it's different, just because like it's really like the whole scene is like, yeah, like you said, like it's really drugged out. It's like really like the music is like super repetitive, even with like the score change. But then like they use that score again later, like at the end of the film,
Interesting.
when Laura and Ronette are partying. And so like that score appears again, and so like it seems like he's like audio tracking certain characters with like the use of drugs in mind in particular. Like I feel like this is Laura's score when she's super high like this.
Yeah, sort of theme to the character in these moments. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I just love it. I think like, oh, okay, so the pink room scene is just so like, this is like, I feel like this is what David Lynch in my head, his films look like.
Yeah.
Like when I imagine like a David Lynch film, when I'm like imagining like Fire Walk with Me, or I'm imagining like Blue Velvet, like this is the kind of sequence that like I'm picturing in my head. These are the sequences that like I think he's like really, really good at doing. This sequence just screams just absolute sleaze. Like if you had to look up the definition of what is sleaze, it's gonna be this scene with like this scoring in particular. Like it is so like this is like just absolutely like you're hooking up with strangers in the back of a bar. Like it's not even like the main room of the bar. It's you've gone into the back room of the bar and you're hooking up with strangers back there, and you're doing drugs and you're drinking a lot, and this is Laura's environment. And that's like where she seems to flourish the most. Like this is like one of the places in the film where like we actually see her like really like determined and like strangely comfortable with herself, is like in this environment. She's like really like charismatic. She's really like determined. She has like that where she like points to the guy across the table and tells him to go down on her. Like that is like her in like this situation. This is her, like this is her personality. And I think it's emphasized a lot by like Donna not quite being like ready for this. Like this is Laura Palmer that Donna has never gotten to experience, and now she's kind of being pulled slowly into this world with Laura Palmer, and it's not quite something that she can save herself from if she decides to go down this path, and so Laura has to intervene for that. But I think that like going back to like the audio mixing itself, the fact that everyone is talking and the audio for the dialogue is recorded, but it's so low, like you have to really crank your TV up to even be able to like actually hear like
Yeah.
the lines of dialogue.
Exactly.
That's really interesting to me as well.
God, I loved it. I loved it so much. I mean, it's just such a bold decision to make. It just, but in that it forces you to listen. And I love that sort of decision and that sort of, you know, um, challenge to the audience to first just experience some sort of different aesthetic choice, but in that draw their attention in even further. That was really exciting. But I also want to commend the editing and the camera work in this scene because they are also so purposeful in that sort of experiential quality of this scene, in that you very much feel like you're with them in this room, in this sort of party scene, but in that also in this sort of drug-induced state. The cutting is abrupt, but also jumping from a it's seemingly like 10 minutes apart, and that feels very authentic. You know, and I think that there's even a couple moments of like handheld camera work that just add to that sort of uncomfortable or sort of unstable presence of mind that is just I was just in love with the sequence. So much about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've heard like going back to like the audio. I've heard that, and I can't confirm this. I've never seen Fire Walk with Me in a theater, but I've heard that
Ooh.
the way that that scene is traditionally supposed to be shown in a theater is with the projectionist amping up the audio for the Pink Room, so that
Oh
that
my
sequence,
goodness.
yeah, is played super loud. And I would just love to be able to sit in a movie theater and experience that, where like you like the where the music is so loud that like you're physically feeling it for like that
Mm-hmm.
extra immersive experience. And then I wonder also about the British version of the film, which doesn't contain any of the subtitles. I would love to also see that screened in a theater under the same circumstances, to see whether or not like I could even begin to hear that conversation that they're having, because it is an important conversation. Like this is where
Right.
we bring back to like Teresa Banks in like the first 30 minutes, and like, oh, it's been a year since Teresa Banks was murdered. Oh yeah, I heard that she was like asking about what people's fathers looked like and was blackmailing someone, and we find out like all this information like in this sequence where it doesn't seem like we can actually really grasp what we're being told, because like it's the audio is just so elusive for it, but it's like perfect, and it's just kind of like, again, like just kind of like thrown out there
And I
for
think
us to pick up
speaks
the scraps.
and I think speaks volumes to what's happening to Laura Palmer, absolutely, and her position in what's going on here. But I wonder to piggyback on what you're saying here. I think I'm so curious in a theater setting, how the sound mix works, and in that where voices are coming from within the theater. I mean, because I love when there's that sort of attention to detail to sound again, and I can only imagine perhaps different voices coming from different sides of the theater. That's just I wish I could experience that. Oh boy.
We're gonna have to see if the archive has like a copy of it.
Seriously, I mean, it's just such a bummer. I mean, if they do have it, imagine like if we could have screened this on campus, this would have been amazing to watch. And on film, I wonder. Oh wow, was this? I don't know if if this was shot on film or not. I imagine it was.
I don't know for sure, but I would be shocked if it was
Yeah.
not a 35 millimeter.
Right, and I mean to that, I mean the colors that we see in this film, um, the lighting. I mean, Twin Peaks has always had such an attention to detail with that, particular in some of like the in the Roadhouse and in One Eye Jacks, and so I can only imagine how that would look in a theater on film projected in that way. Goodness.
Yeah, it is just so beautiful. I think that's like the thing that like I can just watch Twin Peaks. I can just watch Fire
Mm-hmm.
Walk with Me.
Yeah.
Like I like it is just so mesmerizing to just visually like engage with like this film. And I know it can be like super hard to kind of try to visually engage a film like right now, like in this time where like we have to watch everything on like alternative screens, and that means phones are a distraction, things in a household are a distraction,
Mm-hmm.
versus like a theater environment where hopefully none of that is happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
but yeah, I have to agree. I absolutely was enjoying it, but it would just be I would be so curious how this plays in the theater. Other thing I wanted to mention about that I picked up on that I really appreciated in terms of David Lynch's filmmaking style is I noticed, I don't know if it's a purposeful or intentional motif, but something that I would consider a motif was were these extreme close-up shots on various moments that were, happening during moments of horror or dream, of dream sequences. So when she goes to see Harold Smith, there's that moment where she says, I want to say she says "Fire Walk with Me," and there's that quick shot of her like in extreme close up with the makeup, and it's like this really like sort of body horror moment, and the discoloration of her face, and so there's that. There's the close up on the boy with the mask. There's another one when Laura sees Bob in her room behind the dresser, and you get that extreme close up inside the throat. There's these extreme close-ups that happen throughout, and perhaps there's more that I didn't quite jot down or pick up on, but I just love when filmmakers use depth in the frame in this way, and everything isn't so neatly like symmetrical, and those moments tied to moments of horror or moments that are involved in dreams or things like that. I think it does a lot more again to this experiential quality that I think was important to David Lynch with this film.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned like the throat shot, because I think that that's like a great moment of horror right there, where it's like it's not just we've seen Bob, like oh my god we've seen Bob. It's like oh my gosh we're going into Bob. Like there I think is very little more abject that could be added to that than like physically like we're entering this entity that like is trying to enter like other people. Like oh that's like
yes, exactly. It adds so much to this element of possession, or whatever's going on here. I think it really adds a lot to it. Yeah, so
creepy.
Yeah,
dude, that was wild.
Yeah, I'll just like briefly touch on like the very end, like the final shots of Laura and the Black Lodge, because that was okay. That like kind of gets into like the sense of time that I think is a little bit wonky in this film, because so we know that Laura Palmer and Cooper haven't met, but when Laura is in the is in the Red Room or the Black Lodge at the very end, it's Cooper's hand that's on her shoulder, and they zoom out and they show you that it's Cooper. And earlier we had like Annie. Yeah, so Annie had appeared to Laura and appeared in her bed, and she was like covered in blood, and she says, make sure you write in your diary that the good Dale is in the lodge and you cannot leave. And that doesn't happen until after, like that's like one of like the end of season 2 kind of things. Like that's the very like dead end of season 2. And yet like this is happening, so like we're getting like this, like there's a lack of sense of time in this space, if we can consider like the Black Lodge or the Red Room to even be a space. And yeah, that like Dale Cooper can be there to comfort her at like the moment that she dies and makes this transition, while still like later unknowingly trying to find like solace for her by solving her murder. Like wow, I love it.
Yeah, so obviously, like I said, I hadn't seen this before. I want to say I saw a couple stills of it, and so I think I did see that Dale has some sort of presence in the film. But that was one thing going in I was so curious about, was what his presence or screen time was going to be with this film, because if it is in fact a prequel, and we see his introduction to Twin Peaks, the actual location in the series, I was just curious, like how is this going to work? And I thought it was treated really, really well, and made a lot of sense in the perspective of him being brought into the case, but also in this like in the fact that there is this spiritual quality to this, and this sort of ritualistic quality to this whole world, or what's going on within this part of the world. And yeah, I mean, maybe it doesn't totally make sense, but I mean, again, this is partly what I enjoy about this is that it doesn't, for me, it doesn't need to make sense. I'll say, and I mean, obviously I think we could go like break it down scene by scene and perhaps connect things to see how in fact it does. But I think just in a sort of perspective of, again, the spirituality to what's going on here, I think it works. And I just appreciated, his sort of place in the world and how much he fights for solving Laura's case in the series. I think it's an appropriate place for him to have in the film. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that like there couldn't have been a better ending, honestly. Like I think that like if that scene would have continued, then like we know that like we see it would have been, you know, the shot of Laura's like wrapped body washing up on the beach, and then start of the pilot episode would have been how it would have continued.
Right.
So like we don't need that information. I like that it stopped like right there with like Laura like looking up and she sees this image of the angel, which she had said like very briefly earlier in the film that like all the angels are gone.
Right.
And she sees one like disappear from her bedroom, and I think that's kind of meant to be some kind of like symbolic like reckoning of herself and like her like her coping with like the sexual abuse and stuff like that. And then like but like the angel returns and it's Cooper who's standing there like with her when it does. And that's wow, like that's such a powerful ending, like one way or another, that it's like I don't even want like any other endings.
No, truly profound and peaceful ending in a way that I think really helps. Although everything's not solved at this point in the film, you know, there's obvious, and you know, I don't know if anyone who hasn't seen the series yet is watching this first, but I mean, it's a really interesting way to wrap this up, and you know, without answering everything, but just allowing for her character to have some sense of catharsis or just peace, and I do think that was I do appreciate that ending myself, I have to say, yeah. As opposed to, as you say, the on the nose sort of leading into the beginning of the pilot episode. I think that would not have been David Lynch to me. So I think this is much more his style, and I appreciated that choice. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%, because it feels like almost like she only got peace in death, because this entire film is about how like she's just not at peace,
Right.
like at all. Like we are so like in depth like within her psyche, and like her psyche is tortured, and like she's always just been like this character that is like very like pristine and like radiant on like the outside, and very
Right.
collected on the outside, but like inside there's this torment. And finally like we get this inside that is finally at peace. It's not a torment anymore.
It was truly beautiful, and I love the way there's this sort of like airy sense to the visual, and I think if I remember correctly, it does sort of like dissolve out into when the credits come in. I forget what they're imposed over, if they're on that frame or if it's on something else. I can't quite remember the last frame of the film, but I do remember there's this sort of dissolve occurring on the moment of Dale with his hand on her shoulder, and I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah, fantastic movie. Yeah.
Well, hey, I think we did it. I think that about wraps up the episode. So this was, I think, a really great opening to the season, Alex. I love this choice. I mean, personally, I'm a fan of Twin Peaks, a very big fan. So the fact that I hadn't seen this yet was crazy to me. I did not know the premise, honestly. So once you told me this was your pick and what it was actually about, I'm like, holy cow, I'm excited to see this. And so I did truly enjoy it very much. And I think a lot of people who are familiar with Twin Peaks will as well. If you're a fan of David Lynch, if you're a fan of Twin Peaks and haven't caught this yet, I absolutely implore you to watch this. I think you will really enjoy it. So thanks, Alex, for this choice and for bringing this great analysis to it. This was a really delightful conversation to have. With that about does it for this week's show. We hope you all enjoyed the conversation, and we hope you will continue to join us on this third season of virtual programming. And we do have some exciting plans for this season. I think some new ideas in the works, so please do keep up with us. You can subscribe to the show on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts, you should be able to find us. You can follow us on Instagram at Cineposium, and on Twitter at Cineposium to keep up with updates and to keep in communication with us. So thank you all again for listening. Until next week, take care, everyone.